you talk about a story when you tell a story about being in Ireland and talking about the Catholic child abuse scandal. And there's one quote on page 356, which I will read out to you. "Horrible as sexual abuse no doubt was, the damage was arguably less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted by bringing the child up Catholic in the first place." You believe that being brought up as a Catholic is worse than being abused by a priest?
There are shades of being abused by a priest, and I quoted the example of a woman in America who wrote to me. And
with respect, Richard, you're an empiricist, you're a rationalist. One letter from one woman in America isn't really the basis to extrapolate and make such a sweeping conclusion.
That is, of course, true. And I'm not basing it on that. It seems to me that telling children such that they really, really believe that people who sin are going to go to hell and roast forever, it seems to me to be intuitively entirely reasonable that that is a worse form of child abuse, that will give more nightmares, that will give more genuine distress. It seems to me to be intuitively entirely reasonable.
When the empirical evidence was looked at, when there was surveys and studies done by experts in those fields, they found that that was not the case. In fact, not only was it not the case, it was the exact opposite. Children who were raised in a spiritual way, in spiritual training, that they were, not only were they less at risk or neutral, is that they were actually doing far better. So in essence, we're saying that to not give your children spiritual training puts them at risk. The exact opposite of what reality in scriptural principle is, the exact opposite of what's being said in this kind of intellectual vein here. They're wrong. Based on reality, they're wrong. And so that's not even the question. The question is, how did they get so wrong? How did they end up, smart people, being so wrong? I'd like to propose something. Consider this the first food for thought of the morning. It's not in the line of logic. It's not in the reasoning. It is in the starting premise. If you start from the wrong place, you're going to go to the wrong place. It's starting from the wrong premise altogether. And once you're there, then you're going to end up into all kinds of trouble. How quickly as a Christian do you realize when somebody is biblically starting from the wrong premise, and you can defend it? Let's just start with this poster, and we're not going to even talk religion for a minute. We're talking strictly from the aspect of just straight logic. According to science, I am full of wonder, smart, a great learner, beautiful, potential for greatness. According to religion, I am broken, flawed, sinful, dumb, weak, nothing. Which do you think is more damaging? Well, if that's the reasoning, the perception I have, well, the answer becomes very obvious, doesn't it? But even from the sense of logic, we run into problems when we look at this type of thing. For a start, it misrepresents science. Science does not teach you those things. Science claims nothing that is on there. How does science work? It looks at empirical evidence in a logical way. It then comes up with empirical facts. Take, for instance, biochemistry. Let's just start there since we're talking about people. If you study biochemistry, if you study genetics, you will find that with certain chemicals have to be in a fine balance. Certain chemicals, you can even identify them. These things have to be in balance or bad things happen. We find out that we're made out of these complex organic molecules that interact in complex ways, and we're still unraveling it. So this is what we know in a very layman-like way of biochemistry. What does that teach you? It teaches you that you're an interaction of chemicals, fine. It doesn't then turn around and subjectively tell you what you are. It's left to you, then science ends. That is science. Here is what we have discovered. Here are the facts of nature. And then we can gather either impression. You may look at science and go, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Look at the design that God has put into me. Or I may turn around and say, wow, a cosmic fluke of the universe put these chemicals together over time this way, and wow, look what it turned out like. I'm just an accident of nature, but kind of cool, but just an accident of nature. So you can come to either conclusion. So it nullifies the whole argument here. Science does not teach that. In this view, it started from a wrong premise. That is not what science is about. How about then we move over to the religion side? Is it we doing any better over there? Well, if we look at that, first of all, in terms of a meaningful discussion or argument in terms of debate, religion is a useless term. What is religion? For an atheist, it means any superstition you might believe. And everything, by definition, to an atheist will be superstition. It means something else to us. So we're going to give them a hand, and we'll even hone that into something useful. Bible-centered Christianity is what we're talking. We are not in a position to debate anybody else's religion. But as we sit here, this church claims, it states publicly, that it believes in the inerrancy of Scripture. We follow Scripture, Bible-based. So from that point, then let's look. Well, then, if we go there, then that side pretty much falls apart too, because if we look at it in a logical and totally clinical way, none of those words, for the most part, are used. The broken, flawed, dumb, weak, nothing. Scripture really, I challenge anyone to look through and tell me a line in Scripture where it says you are dumb. It doesn't say that. But there is one word, and we're going to latch onto it, and this is where we can turn, I think, into something productive. The term sinful is used there. They hit a good term. They got a good one in there. But now comes back to, this is where we tie the Dawkins. Dawkins said, well, sin, if you do sins, you roast in hell forever. And if you do bad things, you roast in hell forever. Now, if you go home, if you guys go home and you tell your kids, you do something bad, you'll roast in hell forever, then we might say, maybe Dawkins is right. But hopefully your faith goes a little deeper than this. What does sin really mean? And I'll put a plug in for the Wednesday night too. If you hit the Learn More button, I said on the website, it'll take you to session 2 now on the website. And we'll talk more about hell, because he's got two terms going here. What exactly is hell and what exactly is sin? Well, we're just going to concentrate on the whole idea of sin today. One of the bonuses for the Wednesday night thing too is something in facts. We'll look at the first time the word sin is ever used, which is really interesting because it doesn't get used again. We're actually going to look at one of the early words that's used a lot in sin. We go to the 39th chapter of Genesis, and what's going on here is something really spicy. Potiphar's wife's got the hots for young Joseph. And boy, she's making the old hard press to get Joseph into her wiles. And Joseph responds to Potiphar's wife in Genesis 39:9, and she says, "There is no one greater in this house than I." This is Joseph talking back to the wife. "Nor has he kept back anything from me, but you," talking about Potiphar and his wife, "because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness?" And then the end is kind of an interesting curiosity. "And sin against God." He doesn't say sin against Potiphar. He says sin against God. One of the early uses of the word here, and the word that Joseph used in his native tongue with a native concept of what sin meant, so we're talking real early Bible going on here, was the Hebrew word chata. And that word means, literally, to miss, to forfeit, to lack. That's where you would tend to use this word. Now, it implies an action, but even more important, this is the thing to get, it implies a condition. You are an archer. I'm just telling you a state of fact. You didn't know that, but you are. You're out there shooting your bow. You shoot an arrow at your target, and you miss. Well, there was a deed involved. You shot the arrow. But there's also a condition. That arrow is in a lacking condition. It was a bad shot. The arrow is a bad shot. The state of the arrow is it missed. It lacked its achievement. And if we really want to look at it technically, the missed arrow didn't start on the act. It started before the act. It started because maybe, you're an archer, but you're a bad archer, or you're an unfocused archer. Your condition was such that you really missed before you ever pulled the bow. The missing was just a natural consequence of you. And you missed. So here is, right in this one word, the concept starts to develop. Sin is a condition, a state, a nature of the person, an inner nature, that has a natural result in the actions you do, which in turn lead to a condition or a state. A condition or a state. Just throwing in a little sideline, there is a word used one time for sin in the New Testament, only one. It's in Romans, and it goes, "The wages of sin is," used once. You'll find the word wages, but not the wages. It was a whole other Greek word. And the word actually meant, in the literal sense, the rations a soldier got when he was out doing his thing. The rations. So it's saying that if we're in the sinful condition, we literally eat death. That is our ration. That is our portion. We eat death. It's all about this condition of death is what it's all about. Sin is a condition before it is ever an act. Condition, act, result, another condition even worse than the first, act, condition, act. It's a downward spiral. All starts with the idea of condition. Well, does it really teach that? Let's stay in the Old Testament for a bit. The word that is used most above all other words in the Old Testament when the word sin comes up is the word chata'ah, which for the most part means habitual sin. Think about this for a second. Habitual sin. Scenario. Someone is has a bad habit. I'll get the H's out eventually. A bad habit of taking drugs. They take them to the detriment of their body. Well, the deed of taking the drug is simply a natural consequence of the condition. There is an addiction, So the natural thing with an addiction is to take the drug. And then when you take more and more of the drugs, the addiction gets worse. The condition act, and that is habitual sinfulness. It starts with the condition. Okay, we know a lot of times, when you're talking, the Hebrew is this very practical, not many words language, and then we hit the New Testament. It switches into this Greek of the time that's philosophical, full of words, sometimes different meanings. So did the concept change then when we get into the New Testament? What happens with this whole idea of sin? Well, interesting, there's a pastor by the name of Bob Jones, not the Bob Jones University, a pastor named Bob Jones. Still must be a smart guy, Northside Bible Church in Jacksonville, Florida. And he put out a very interesting article, if you care to Google or read it, on 7 words for sin in the New Testament. This whole concept started when sin first came into the picture, way back in Genesis 3. Exactly what happened. Mankind, humanity, made a choice. They wanted the tree of knowledge, which would teach them about evil. How would they learn about evil? By participating in evil. It was something we hadn't experienced, so that's how we gained the knowledge. And then the evil that we participated in then became part of us, and then sin became a nature, and it became the nature of man. And then one generation passed it on to the next. But that didn't leave them innocent, because every generation that went along contributed to the sin nature that was going on. And it went condition, act, all the way down through the ages. Romans 3, verse 9. What then? Are we better than they? Talking about all these folks, all the different people in Rome, talking to the Christians about the rest of the world or whatever. What then? Are we better than they? Not at all, for we have all previously charged, both Jew and Greeks, that they are all under sin. The infection of sin that we were talking about. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They have all gone out of their way. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. There's the condition act going on. But let's take a look at what the condition really is. Sin in its very essence is to walk away from God. That's what sin is. Walking away from God. It then only becomes logical. The outcome of walking away from God is going to be the absence of God. Walking away from the goodness of God means you get further and further away from the condition of goodness. And I said we would talk about hell on Wednesday, but let me just let a little cat out of the bag here, is that when we look at hell, the defining feature of hell is not fire. The defining feature of hell is the absence of God's goodness. That is the defining feature just as much as the defining feature of heaven isn't clouds and harps or anything like that. It is the presence of the goodness of God. Hell is a natural, logical consequence of the condition of sin. And we all have it.